Former Vice President Mike Pence is officially in the race for the Republican nomination for president. He joins a crowded field of those trying to fend off former President Donald Trump. Joining me now to help put all the drama of this high-stakes race in perspective is Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter at The Hill. Mychael, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Nick.
Mychael, you and I talked about this earlier this week. Now, the former vice president is officially in the race, and he appeared on CNN last night for a town hall, and it didn't take long for his former boss to come up. Take a listen to part of what he said, and let's talk on the other side.
The president and I had a difference in the past, and that hasn't changed. But also there are profound differences about the future of this country and the future of the Republican Party that are articulated today. But when the president asserted that I had the right to overturn the election, I said today that I felt that he was asking me to choose between him and the Constitution.
Mychael, in that town hall meeting, did Mr. Pence say enough? How is Mr. Pence managing his message with Republicans who may still favor the former president?
Nick, there were two clear themes that I saw in Mike Pence's town hall last night with CNN. First, he wanted to draw a very direct line between him and former President Trump. January 6th came up a number of times. Mike Pence noted on a number of occasions that he thought that was a terrible day. He said that he again believed that he did not have the authority to overturn the election results on January 6th, as former President Trump had suggested and had urged him to do, as we've seen through subsequent reporting and hearings. But he also walked that fine line a little bit, not trying to totally alienate some of the Trump supporters. For example, he said he hopes the DOJ thinks better than to charge former President Trump in this classified documents case. There's been some reporting in recent days that the DOJ is nearing an indictment. But other than Trump, Mike Pence also really highlighted his conservative values and his conservative bona fides. Remember, this is somebody who was a congressman from Indiana, a governor from Indiana. He is a devout evangelical, and he has a lot of these very strong conservative values, whether that be on foreign policy, whether that be on trade, specifically abortion, which came up a lot in last night's town hall. So what we saw from Mike Pence was, hey, I'm a Republican, but I'm not like Trump. You know, I disagree with a number of things that Trump said, but he didn't want to totally alienate that wing of the party.
Mychael, you talked about how Mr. Pence walked that fine line. Now, he did say that January 6th is disqualifying for Mr. Trump to run again. How is that sitting with members of his own party?
Yeah, so this was sort of an interesting statement that Mike Pence had made. He said that it was disqualifying. He essentially said that former President Trump had a choice between the Constitution and between himself, and he chose himself. And now the American voters can make that same decision, the Constitution or former President Trump. And then Mike Pence was asked, well, you know, you said that you will support the eventual nominee. How could you say that you'll support former President Trump if you said that he's basically disqualified from holding office? And Pence said that he demurred. He said that he doesn't believe that he will be the nominee. But look, there are a number of strong supporters of former President Trump up on Capitol Hill. A number of lawmakers have endorsed him more than any other candidate in the race, I will note. And I don't know if his stance on January 6th will really sway any voters at this point. Look, January 6th was back in 2021. The perspectives and stances on that very polarizing day are very strong and very set in. So everyone knew where former President former Vice President Mike Pence stood on the issue of January 6th. So I don't really know if that'll be an issue that'll sway any voters, just because people knew where he stood on that. There's nothing more to learn there.
Mychael, let's talk about a couple more people who announced yesterday, including North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, who released a really nice, well-produced video. I enjoyed his message of talking about how he really worked his way up from the ground up. He threw his hat into the ring, but many may not have heard of him before now. How does this work to get his name ID out there?
Listen, Iowa, which is obviously the first primary state for Republicans, it's a state that is really based off retail politics. So I would not be surprised if we saw Doug Burgum get settled in Iowa, start meeting voters, shaking hands with voters, having conversations with them, and not just in Iowa, but also in other early states, whether that be New Hampshire, South Carolina. Look, the story of Doug Burgum, this lower level government official who's jumping into the presidential race, reminds me of Pete Buttigieg. Remember when the little known mayor of South Bend, Indiana, jumped into the Democratic primary for president. He was relatively unknown on the national stage. He ended up winning the Iowa caucuses. So I think that just shows that if these candidates put the work in, get really into that retail politics and try to sell their message to voters, sometime a candidate who does not have strong name ID on the national stage could grow and could actually come out faring very well in some of these early states.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation in your cable lineup. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-based, unbiased coverage.